Well, Roberta, it's very nice to meet you, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I was doing some prep last night, and so you have a bachelor's in English, is that correct? A master's in educational administration, and a PhD in educational administration?
Yeah, there's a few bits along the way there.
Sure.
So education degree I did first, and then a degree in English history and Native studies at the time, and and then a master's in administration, a master's in counseling psychology, a diploma, honors diploma in immigration law, because I practiced law for a while. That's another story altogether. And then just finishing off my PhD in educational administration, although I feel as if my topics have always been with administration, always cross-disciplinary. So maybe we'll talk about that a bit more later on.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you, how did law tie into all of this?
Well, I met this American, this New Yorker on the beach in Jamaica.
Okay.
About 20 years ago, and we ended up getting married, and he was special forces in the American military, and we discovered how difficult it is, how complex the immigration system is, and how difficult it was to bring him, get him to Canada. So even though we were married, and he's an entrepreneur, always has been, and he sold his businesses, moved to Canada, and said, hey, immigration and helping people get to Canada and making it easier and better for them sounds like a great business idea. And we partnered with a law firm. I studied full-time while I was working full-time in the school system for a couple of years, and wrote the federal exam to practice immigration law exclusively. And and I did that for a while.
Wow. And how long?
All told, about 7 years.
Wow, okay.
But not towards the end of it, not full time. Or I shouldn't say even towards the end of it. About 5 of those years, I was doing a couple of different things and very much specializing, because the our immigration system, probably like any in the world, changes very quickly. Procedures change without notice, and it's a very hard thing, I discovered, for people coming to Canada who are promised things and aren't always pleased with the results when they arrive.
Yeah, I imagine. I've never had to immigrate anywhere, so I wouldn't know. Like, what are some of is there like a most common frustration that people experience, or?
The most tragic thing that I have seen are folks who are absolutely brilliant, who are well educated, or not, but good people, and they have this dream to come to Canada, and they do have freedom. They have a better quality of life, people say, but we don't recognize their credentials, or we make it very difficult for them. So there's almost a cliche of the doctor driving cab in Canada. It is the truth. I've talked to so many people, and I talk to people all the time, especially if I'm taking a cab, and say, oh yeah, so who are you, what are you about, and they'll say, I'm really grateful to be here, and I was a teacher, I was a doctor, I was a professor, I was and they've given up things for their children, to have a better life for their children, and say it's okay that I'm driving cab and that I'm a janitor, and they're contributing well, and they're happy, happier, or happy to have that life for their children. So I really admire that. It costs people a great deal to come here, whether they have help or not. We try to save folks money, actually, by guiding them along the way. And so, yeah, it's, the dream is still there, but it's very different, and sometimes people they say, I'm not going to go back to school for 6 years to gain a credential that I already have because of licensing. And I find that a very hegemonic view. We think, oh, well, our system, and we do have an excellent education system and higher education, but other places in the world do as well. Yet we make people jump through the proverbial hoops, and yes, people should, yes, they should meet our standards, but it doesn't mean that they need to go back to school in many cases for, to completely redo their degree. But the problem with that is, if we're going to have them do that, then let's indicate that before they get here.
Oh, so they don't really know beforehand?
A lot of people don't.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, and it's not that people don't do their research. It's just it becomes ever more complex, right? So yeah, it's a system that I didn't want to continue working in. And I missed students. It was really why I was, after a time, and it was a great business that we had. We met incredible people. I did a lot of work with folks who were very successful business owners in the UK and Europe, and they wanted to come to Canada because they traveled here, they'd gone to the Rockies, they'd skied, they'd been to Toronto, and so we met amazing people. But rules change, systems change, and I miss students. So yeah.
It seems like that's been quite the career for you as well now, in teaching students and being involved in education for quite some time.
Yeah. So since the beginning, sometimes people say, wow, you really must like going to school. It's just, I love learning, and I've learned plenty by traveling and trying different things and wanting to do many different things in my life. But I've never seen it as, it was never imposed on me. It's always been my choice. So, I started school when I was 6, and I haven't really left. I've always been in a school, pretty much in a school somewhere. And if I haven't been in a school, I've been counseling. Even when I was working in immigration law, there was a lot of counseling skills that would come into place, especially for folks that, it's a tough transition.
Yeah,
it's big. Big moving from one place, culture, system, country to another.
Yeah, no doubt. And so with counseling, I guess, so being in school in some capacity all this time, when you were more focused on working in education, were you also pursuing your personal educations, or were you kind of
always
going to... Okay.
And oftentimes both full-time at the same time.
Oh, wow.
I can't do I've discovered I can't do that anymore. The amount of time that I need to sleep, but I've never really required a great deal of sleep, and so I was able to do it, and I hope do both things well. But I first realized that I wanted to go into counseling after teaching at it was my first school. I started as a baby teacher, Newtown Collegiate in the city here. Definitely one of the best places one could ever be to work with people and to start out. And that place really evolved over time. And it was a place that, I guess our school system was often at risk of not helping students, not supporting students, or being the kind of place that students need, who don't necessarily fit the classic student model.
Yeah.
I don't know if that even exists anymore, especially not after COVID. But that was a place where I think 6 of the colleagues I worked with, maybe 7 of us now, actually all went into counseling. We were English teachers or math teachers or just, other places in that school. And we worked with people that had not had great school experiences, or had just had so many difficulties with problems in life, oftentimes from, family of origin, and it was just, kids that lived on the street, young mums, so we tried to make the school into a place that worked for them very much. So I taught English at the time, and then ended up teaching home ec, senior foods and clothing, which was so much fun. It was great to be able to work, do Hamlet for half a day, and then, go and work with people.
Yeah.
Learning about, budgeting and cooking and healthy eating.
Yeah, the economy of a household. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think we built a place that was good. It's good and still good today. I haven't been there for many years, but yeah. So that's, we spent a lot of time as teachers just talking to kids as human beings. And the school had a partnership with, or I guess it depends which way you look at it. Whitecap Dakota Sioux had a partnership with us, and they had elementary school, but not the high school. So the high school high school age kids would come in, and that's where I first, beyond the family that I married into, first worked with and learned from elders and knowledge keepers, community members, and worked with Indigenous students. So that really gave me my grounding there. Yeah.
And so moving from teaching into a little bit more of counseling, was it a mesh, or was it you're not teaching anymore and now you're counseling?
That's a good question. Yeah, I'm pretty sure most of us felt like we were counseling every day there.
Yeah, fair enough.
But I was counseling, and then someone suggested that I, really, based on the things that I had done at that, done with the team at that school, a few people said, administration, that's the way to go for you. You've helped to do things that have been good for people here, and you're organized, and they had all sorts of advice. I had no idea really what that might look like. And so then I left that school and worked on my master's, went back into the school system after a year's leave, and then after teaching at another high school in the city was shoulder tapped to go into counseling. I definitely had the work experience in it, and had some of the education in it already. And so then I left the classroom and went into the counseling office. Mm-hmm.
Was there any specific experiences with students that made you want to make that transition as well, or was it more of a gradual thing? Does anything stand out as being like, no, now I want to counsel now?
I felt like that was something that I wouldn't say I was called to do, but it just was something that I enjoyed doing, was spending the time talking to students. And it always was. My favorite, absolute favorite kids are always the grade 10, usually boys, the grade 10 boys who would rather be in the shop, like rather be anywhere but in my English class. Like that was always my favorite, favorite ones to work with, right? They're squirming in their desks and, just, and just making that a better place for them, and just spending time talking to kids. So I think that that was a big part of why I said, sure, I'll do this. And then it was after that time that I met my husband, and I made this transition into law, and so.
I'm sure a lot of those skills translated pretty well working with people trying to immigrate as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, certainly. And running a business, supervising staff. We had a very fast growing business, and so we ended up with quite a few staff, and then also agents and partners all over the world. My husband is that was definitely more his expertise, his networking expertise, and he started out in traveling to the UK initially, before I did. I was based in Canada doing the paperwork.
Yeah.
So, mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, man. I was really appreciative that we had counselors in high school, and thankfully I didn't ever really need to be in that office a whole lot, but it was
made your parents happy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I remember sitting in there to give friends comfort sometimes, and be a support that way, and it was it always felt nice that I remember going into high school from elementary school and being told that there was a counselor and that they would like help you pick your classes, but they were also this person that you could go and talk to about all this other stuff. And it was really amazing to me because I didn't know that was option. It was just I was I don't know. I just remember being thankful that they were there. Um, I don't know, and so I guess saying thank you for doing that for students.
You know, I didn't have the experience of having a counselor in high school. Our vice principal played the role of a counselor. So the disciplinarian and the counselor doesn't work, right? I mean, it was just small town Saskatchewan. And so I was appreciative of it too, of that role very much as well when I was at Newtana, because we had incredible counselors. When I was saying that we as teachers spent a lot of time counseling, it wasn't in any sort of professional capacity. It was just, you did lots of that because people would disappear for a time. You'd want to, you'd be concerned about them. You'd want to know, where can I send you? How can I connect you? We didn't pretend to be counselors. And at that school as well, I think I learned a bit about, and it might seem ironic somehow or almost contradictory. I learned how I could survive as a counselor because I learned not to take my work home with me. Right. And so I really cared about those kids. And I mean, we lost kids. We do as teachers. We do it as counselors. We lose kids to suicide for variety of circumstances and violent deaths. There's that pain, when you have this relationship and then you lose, just like in life. And so you couldn't survive it. You couldn't survive teaching in that place if you didn't have your colleagues who were amazing, and if you didn't figure out that you were doing the best that you could all the time, and you were supporting the kids who were there. Yeah. So partly it was that practice and that learning and just seeing how the other amazing people, fantastic professionals that I worked with, because it wasn't just teachers. That was a great team, but it was also social worker, folks who took care of the babies, took care of the little ones in the daycare, addictions counselor who was good friends with to this day. So many other professionals in that building that helped to serve students, so students didn't have to be going, I have an appointment here, I have an appointment there.
Yeah,
everything was housed in that building. And that idea of, I think the overarching definitely was the idea of looking at students in a holistic way, as a whole person, and that you're not just teaching that person about writing an essay, for example. You're teaching a person, and you're working with them. What skills do they need to work their way through that, that course, that school, to get to where they want to be. So, yeah.
I think that's a big one too, is you kept using the word person. And I think that, I don't know that people necessarily forget it, but I think it's easier to, in any line of work, especially when you're working with the public, to fall more into it as a job instead of realizing that you are still interacting with people on a daily basis, and they are people and they have feelings, and they needed to be treated as such. Like I always personally reacted better to any adults, but particularly teachers, when I felt like they were discussing things with me in a way that they were trying to help me understand and not just force some sort of knowledge or lesson on me. And
that makes sense to me, and I think that's the way that I brought up my sons, right? Speak to them as adults. You try to say yes, always say yes, bring them up to be good people, and just and always that respectful relationship. And that's always, that has always worked well for me, I guess I would say.
Did you find it was harder to kind of make connections or really sit down and understand these kids and also be able to not bring it home?
I can't say that I was certainly an expert at it in the beginning. And I think my first husband would definitely attest to that. I think that was something that was learned over time.
Mm-hmm.
But if I want to be the very best the very best mom, the very best community volunteer, the very best daughter, and friend, and to be all of these things that one wants to be, needs to be outside of school to be the best, the best person who shows up for those, for the kids every day.
Mm-hmm.
I found that group as well to always be just so incredibly grateful. It's not that I didn't see them as individuals, but to give you an example, I mean, when I started teaching, I was a couple of years older than the students, and then soon I was younger than the students because we had more and more adults in. And so you could build a place in the classroom where you could have real discussions and you could tie things together that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do with 16-year-olds. Not that I don't love the 16-year-olds. So for example, one quarter, when I was teaching English 30B, and we were doing Hamlet, I had a lady from England, recently immigrated from England, who was upgrading. She had left school when she was in grade 9, got her secretarial credentials and had done that. And when she emigrated, she wanted her high school credential and wanted to do some other things. And so I had students from 17 to 54 in my class. Well, what do you do with that, right? Well, you have fun with it. And you look to people's strengths. And then you've got people in the room that say, yeah, this story is really messed up. The same thing happened on my res. They're like, my uncle married my mom. Like people who have more life experience can understand, for example, the way we taught it at that time. This was a little while ago, like the literature, right? Like you see the truths in those things. So I guess I'm just giving that as an example of, for the most part, I just loved being with those people every day, and there were those hard times and there were those losses, but there were also those incredible joys. I had the pleasure, although I wasn't sure when I first came into it, the pleasure of spending lots of my years there coordinating graduation. And you want to talk about a celebration. Graduation always is so important. But man, when you've been through a lot and you make it through and you've done well and you can see this is what I want to do next, and you're 25 and you have a couple little ones, like it's a really big deal. And sometimes you're the first person in your family who's graduated from high school, right? And you're the first person certainly as well who's going to university, and that's important to you. And you're the role, you're providing that example for your kids. I think I got away from the question there a bit, but I guess to say that the hard times are hard, but there's lots of joy. There's lots of joy in the people that you work with, whether those are the professionals, as in school or the students. Yeah. And so you can take joy home with you too.
That's good. I was thinking about this the other day too, because I was talking to someone and we were talking about people who I think this relates. I should be able to tie this back in, but we're talking about people who keep people at an arm's length to keep everybody away from them because they feel it will be easier to never have to break a deep friendship or a relationship, because they don't ever get close enough because they don't want to get hurt. But it's really interesting because I think when you go into your life and your work with this idea of trying to interact deeply with people, you're risking a lot more. You're going to get your heart broken. You're going to see a lot of sadness, and you're going to learn a lot of stories and hear a lot of stories from people that you might not want to have heard, but you won't get as deep a joy out of life if you don't go into those places. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like that was your experience.
It was, and I think it it continues to be. I'm in a very different setting now, but I'm trying to think of the saying. I'm never really great at remembering quotations, but there's kind of the idea of, if you don't risk love, the quotation will come to me right after right after we end. But if there's, you need to take those risks, or else. Yeah. I wonder about people like that too. I just always think that there's reasons, like they've been hurt badly, and so there's reasons that sometimes it's personality, right? Personality type, or just maybe lack of interest. But I wonder, that fear of connecting with others. It's protecting one's heart, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I think fear is the right word, and it's unfortunate, I think, as well, because it is fear. And like when you're growing up, when I was a little kid, I remember thinking that people that were mean or didn't have friends or these type of things, like, oh, that person's a loser, or that person's a bully, and that was just the way it was. It was just who they were. And as for my experience, at least, as I get older, I realized that 100% of those people have been hurt in some way. They've got something going on. It's like the phrase hurt people hurt people. And it makes you really sad for them, because you want to know why. What is it that's happened to you, or what are you so afraid of that is causing you to keep everybody else away? Because like you might not be going out every day and getting hurt, but you're just missing out on so much as well.
Yeah, and life is so short, right? Depending on one's beliefs. Like perhaps, this is what their spirit does now, but in another, if their spirit's in another body, in another life, maybe they'll take that risk based on missing out this time round. But life is very short, and I feel it's very sad as too. I sad as well. I don't run across those people very often, so
that's good.
Yeah.
And so are you still counseling in some capacity now, or?
Not professionally. I will say though, and that's a great segue, and you didn't even realize it, I spent so much time during the pandemic, during especially high lockdown, in my role in teaching people how to use Canvas, the new LMS at USask. I ventured into that role just right at the beginning of COVID, left the school system, retired early, but retired for a weekend, a Victoria Day weekend. I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know, like any of us, didn't know how long COVID was going to be. A friend that I had taught with years before hired me, Wendy James, and she said, can't make any promises. This isn't a permanent position. I said, well, my life always works its way out. It's absolutely fine. And she said, okay, you need to learn this LMS you need to learn this very quickly to be able to teach it to other people. So how that ties into counseling, I feel like I use my counseling skills almost every day. And I think you do once you have that practice. Faculty, however, and it wasn't just faculty, it was sessional instructors, so I'll just say instructors, were, so many of them, they just had their souls laid bare. Like if you were willing to listen, they were very vulnerable. They're used to being the expert, and now they're the student. They're being heavily critiqued, some, because they weren't providing what students felt they should provide. Students were in crisis. And so I wanted to, and I would spend time listening and just building those relationships to say, I'm here for you. We've done this other training. I met you through this workshop. Of course, everything was being done online. Not everybody learns in a workshop online. You do this, this is why you do this is good pedagogy, this is going to help the students. And at the end of a workshop, I would say, here's my email address if you want to get a hold of me, and people took me up on it. So I met lots of new friends, new acquaintances, and used my counseling strategies and really my framework for approaching people so much in the last couple of years. And I wouldn't say that I'm needing to enact those approaches as much. However, the work I do now in consulting, in working with, I work at the Gwinnett Center for Teaching and Learning. Many of those skills are used all of the time, active listening, figuring out, getting to what's the need, what's the problem, how can I support, and just capacity building, confidence building, because ultimately when you are a counselor or when you are a trainer or a consultant, well, unless money is your key motivator, you want that person to become their own best counselor or their own best learner about the technology or whatever that might be. Yeah, so I strive to do that and have fun with people and people they've had a hard road as far as that element of having the desk flipped, I guess, having the podium flipped. And some people did very well. They picked up on the technology extremely well. But for those who didn't, and there's always frustrations. It's not always, that people didn't understand something. It's just a very, software is always a very complex system. There's always things that aren't necessarily intuitive and things that are hidden and such. So I really enjoy working with people to help them navigate that system and get them excited about it, because it actually is really good. It's very good software. It can be used pedagogically well to help students work through courses. Even now, most courses are I think probably safe to say for most programs, most classes are back face to face.
Well, I commend you for trying to learn, or for learning Canvas and then teaching it to everybody, because I was a student during that process. I went from Blackboard to Canvas.
Bye Blackboard.
And yeah, I remember sometimes, and I've never really struggled with that stuff too much, so it wasn't a terrible transition for me. But there were some times even when I was told there'd be like a link somewhere or this here, and just could not find it. And I knew it was there, but just like trying to navigate sometimes I don't know, and I consider that stuff to come pretty intuitively to me. So I imagine it was quite an obstacle to teach. Like, I imagine you had many teachers that you were working on, right? So trying to help.
Worked with lots of folks. And the thing was, well, and still is, it's a piece of software, and Instructure wouldn't like me saying this, but really it's meant for K-12. Quizzes are meant for quick little quizzy dizzies. Like, it's not meant to, put together 100 multiple choice questions for 300 engineering students. Like, it's just not, but we didn't have anything else. And so, with the system crashes and the frustrations, and people are already stressed out, students and instructors alike, it's, those elements of it that you try your very best to, plan and problem solve at the time. It's, it's difficult. And people say, oh, it's so much better than Blackboard, and it is in lots of ways. There's a couple of things maybe that are better in Blackboard, but I had used Blackboard, not extensively, but I had used it because I teach in the College of Education, and so I had used it as a repository for materials, for readings, because it was handy for students. But prior to COVID, I hadn't used it to any extent, to its full extent, certainly, of what the kinds of things it could be used for. And I didn't entirely trust it either. And when I was working face to face with people, we were still, like 6-7 years ago, taking paper in.
Yeah.
Hand me your paper, hand me your essay, or your project, or whatever it might be, or email it to me. I don't encourage that anymore. Too hard. Well, Canvas is a great system. So.
Oh yeah, I see.
Yeah, you can just feed it all through there.
Yeah. Not to jump back too far, but I wanted to, you mentioned something that it reminded me of a conversation or something that Dr. Scott Napper had told me. And you were talking about how going through this transition with all these instructors, that they were laying their souls bare. And I wish I would have heard this while I was in school, because it was really eye-opening for me. And he said that we were talking about how sometimes when you're in a lecture hall, you go up there and as a student, you've got this teacher that's just lecturing to you, and you can tell that they're not really in it. They're not super passionate about it, or maybe they are about the topic, but this course that they're teaching is not exactly what they want to be doing. You can kind of feel it. And he mentioned to me that it's I can't remember what the word he used was, but this idea of you're being vulnerable as a teacher, going up there in front of hundreds of kids, really, and some of them are sleeping, some of them are not paying attention, some of them are chatting in groups amongst their friends, and it was really eye-opening for me. And like I said, I wish I would have heard that while I was still in school, because I think it would have given me a lot more grace for my instructors. And I guess I was curious if people have been approaching you about. I know that you're not in a formal counseling position right now with the University of
Correct.
Saskatchewan, but do people come up to you asking for help with that kind of stuff, just about feeling stressed out and nervous about going in front of students? And
for the most part, people, because I do lots of different things in my role, but when I'm consulting with someone, it's usually about a problem in teaching, right? Like, how do I make this better? How do I get students involved during class so that they're learning what I want them to learn? And they're getting through the class, and they'll have that knowledge, that information, but that it's gonna stay with them. It's gonna stick with them. They're not just they're not writing a test and forgetting it all. And so, partway into those conversations, depending on who it is, and I meet with lots of people just in the last few months who are newer, like younger scholars, and looking for faculty positions. And so I find them to be quite forthright about, this is what I want, this is what I'm this is what I'm scared about, or these are the challenges that I'm having. But it's not because of questions that I ask them. I think maybe it's just the way I talk to people. I don't know. I don't know what that is. So maybe it's my manner.
People just tend to open up.
Perhaps that's what it is. And I always tell, I work with graduate students who are interested in learning how to teach and are quite passionate, from all disciplines, all across the campus. And it's through graduate studies, College of Graduate Studies, that we offer a couple of courses. One of them is Introduction to University Teaching. And the students know that I care about them. I tell them that. I care that they will become the very best teachers that they can, or if they want to be the very best mentor, the very best facilitator, because it matters to me how they're going to, that they will have a good experience, that their students will have a good experience. And so I'm very open with people about that when I spend more time with them. So maybe that's part of that, how that relationship develops as well, like that they know that I actually care about them getting where they want to be. And I mean, it's a tough go, right? You have so many people getting PhDs and very few faculty positions. And so any of the things that graduate students learn about good teaching can be applied in so many areas, because they're not necessarily going to be, I mean, I hope for them that they are, but they're not necessarily going to be you know, well, they might be instructors, but they might not have a faculty position, right? Or they might go into research. They might go into industry. Well, that might be research as well. But whatever they're doing, getting them to think about learning. What do you want your students to learn? You know, how are you going to know that they've learned that, and how will you help them to get there? Because a big part of the responsibility is students as well. But it doesn't happen because, often it doesn't happen because we go up to a podium and talk to people for 90 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Although if you're a really great storyteller, and I've had some profs like that, I've learned a lot. Soak it in.
Yeah. That's such a skill when you can do that, when you can get knowledge through very well to people by just speaking. Yeah, I'm always extremely impressed when I can watch somebody just lecture, and I'm like, I don't know about everybody else, but I'm super engaged right now, and all he's doing is talking, or she's doing is talking. But it's not a super common skill, unfortunately. So
it's not, as is, well, so many skills, but I just think of great orators, or, you know, there aren't that many there. You know, there aren't that many around that are skilled, and not because they're, you know, they have a great speechwriter. A lot of it is storytelling. I mean, those are the people that I really listen to. So I think about a prof that I had forever ago, second year history class, Bob Grogan. Well, I would never call him Bob. Dr. Grogan. And he would come in, 20th century, world history, post World War II or something. Okay, I should remember better. I said he made an impression upon me. He would come in and he would tell that story and all the complexities of it. So first of all, I was astounded that anybody would know that much, that level of detail.
Yeah.
And then he was so engaging. And then there were other profs that were just, you could tell that they were passionate. So they might lecture for the entire 50 minutes, but I would be engaged because I could see that they were excited, that they loved what they were doing. So that's part of it too. I think the energy we get off of people, which is tougher to do, you know, when you're, 15 rows back in a lecture theater or whatever that might look like. But yeah, so storytelling and that passion is that, for me, that's what, you know, what'll do it.
Well, I'm the same way, and I feel like I say this every episode or every podcast, but there's something just so exciting about watching somebody that's passionate about something just talk about it, and it could be anything. Like, there's like on my YouTube, I watch a channel called Smarter Every Day, and I just like I watch pretty much any video that is suggested to me from his channel, even if it's something I'm completely uninterested in, because just watching, I think his name is Destin, the guy that runs the channel, just watching him study something and share his experience with you about it is it's feels rewarding in a weird way. Like, it's just so exciting to watch him just learn passionately, I guess.
Just, you know, you talking about watching videos, like, and the kind of the short bits as opposed to the long bits. It's interesting how, you know, the research keeps showing us that people's attention spans are getting, you know, smaller and smaller. But if we're engaged and people are excited, somehow we seem to be able to hang on longer, don't we? Yeah. Whether it's a video or whether it's a lecture. There's nothing wrong with lectures. I believe in lectures. Instructors have such deep knowledge. That's what we're there for, you know. But we just hope that, you know, they would break them up a bit with some activity, with perhaps that's, you know, discussion with people talking to, you know, one other person or a small group, or just, you know, even like we're saying with Canvas, you know, you have that as a tool. You're watching that lecture before class, maybe, you know, making a comment on it, and then coming and working with that with your peers and TAs, or, you know, and or professor when you're in class. The model is changing over time. I don't think any of us at Guanamas Center, any teaching and learning center, sing throughout the lecture. Lectures are, it's a delivery method, but just we for students' sake we need to be creative with it. I think for the learning's sake, and just be clear on am I getting up there and talking about this content, or what is it that I want them to to learn from this, to take away from this.
Right. Well, I guess like anything else, right? Like the good lectures are going to do better than the bad lectures, and not that anybody is good or bad, but I guess just their ability to captivate their audience. And yeah, and like you said, if your attention, or if you are interested in something, your attention will be there. Like I regularly listen to lectures that are more than an hour and a half long, but it's because it's a topic I'm seeking out, right? Like I'm interested in learning about it. So
that's the difference from taking those kind of general classes when we start out in school, university or college, and then the ones that we've chosen to take, right?
Yes.
They the very the specific ones, the ones that we're chasing after, more or less. Something else about lectures, though, that I've learned over time is you really have to think about. I've learned this over COVID too, for myself as an instructor and just working with other people. You really need to get to what are those essentials. The students need to know, like, what am I actually wanting them to take away? Because there's things that we're excited about that are well, they're important to us, but is that essential? And we really needed, as instructors, to pare that back over COVID for lots of different reasons, capacity and otherwise, just with all the change. And hopefully those, that if people were practicing that's something that has stuck with them as far as good pedagogy. And you put the bits in, and you put the stories in, you put the bits in, but it's not about volume.
And quality over quantity, right?
Although, that being said, I do not want my physician to have been pared back to absolute, like, so much is essentials, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I had an interesting experience not that long ago, speaking with folks from a professor and a vice or provost of a university and associated colleges, veterinary colleges, and they were visiting our university. They were also looking for curriculum development support, the kinds of things that we can't just pick up and leave, even if they were a partnership university. And they said that in their veterinary colleges, students listen to lectures for the first 3 years, and are tested, tested consistently, and in similar ways through those first 3 years. And in the 4th year, that's when they get to touch animals. So that's when they do sutures, that's when they give injections. Well, they've forgotten perhaps their basic anatomy of the horse from first year. So they really, and rightly so, really want to rework the curriculum to get the clinical pieces in there sooner. And I don't see that, to that extreme in that disconnect with anyone that I've worked with or in North America, but just we need to apply what it is that we've learned, no matter how brilliant we are, unless we have the classic, and it's lay terms, I guess, photographic memory. But for most people, unless they apply that, apply that information soon, they don't know where to inject. They don't know how to do these things. I had suggested to one of the professors as well. I said, well, what if they get to 4th year? I should have never said this. What if they get to 4th year and they're working with animals and they decide they don't like it? Well, that wasn't even a question, right? It doesn't matter if you don't like it. You've earned your way there. You're doing it. That's your career. Yeah. It's like, oh my goodness, it'd be hard. Different system.
A lot of time, money, and effort spent by that point. So
and their family, the sacrifices families have made, and it's kind of like, a college of education. You really hope that college of education students get out, as they do in our college, get out early, very early in their degree, to see, do I even like this, being on the other side of the desk? Because if you don't, you probably should, do some exploration, right?
yeah, well, I imagine that's really important because especially with kids, when when kids don't have a personal relationship with you, and even when they do, they will put everything on the table. They'll let you know how it is. And so if you can't handle that, or you know that it will take some time for you to be able to handle it, I think it's probably very important to get in there soon and learn kids' attitudes and how to deal with them. And as you said, not take it home, because they're kids and they're saying things. Sometimes they're just saying things, right?
Yeah. They say things to teachers, say things to other kids that, down the road, if they remembered, they would certainly regret. But that's just part of the psychological development of human being.
Yeah.
Most people progress past that, to develop empathy. Some people never do, but
And those people are always interesting when you meet them.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's so many. There's a subreddit called I can't remember what it's called, but it's just kids doing weird things. It's funny. Sometimes I'll go on there and just watch, and it's funny because then you get to look back and think about the ridiculous things that you said and did, and you realize you weren't much different. It's just easier to look down at them in hindsight.
And we forget a lot too, right? And you just yes, we do.
We've been talking a lot about the Gwenna Moss Center now. What is your role? What's your official role there?
Official role. So the title is Educational Development Specialist.
Okay.
And so just, supporting people in the way that they, in ways that they want to learn more about teaching, or that they have a specific problem in teaching that they would like to learn about. So I have a variety of roles within that group. And you've heard about my career thus far, so you might think that sounds like a good match for me.
Yes.
Sounds like a good setup. So we still do a bit of help in Canvas. I'm very fortunate right now to have the internationalization portfolio. One of my colleagues built that portfolio, and beginning of, or just before COVID and into COVID, and now she is working on sustainability. So she's taken a leave from that portfolio for now. So that work is not just about how do we work with international students, although that's an important thing, but it's more about how do we understand the group of folks in our classes that we're working with as a diverse group, everyone in the group, regardless of country of origin, religion, culture, ethnicity, gender identity, whatever that might be, and how do we learn to be with each other? How do we learn to learn from each other? How do we learn to communicate? How do we have that level of awareness? How do we get ourselves up to speed? Because that's what the world is about, right? So that intercultural competency and all of the elements really of equity, diversity, and inclusion. I've done some work as well, supporting staff around how do we design our courses so that they are inclusive, so that they support student wellness. A really important thing to me, personally and professionally as well, is the bit of work that I get to do within the center, and working with one of my colleagues on indigenization. And so that as well is vitally important to me. And so that's his role. And then occasionally I get to do a bit of work with him. I'm a member of the curriculum team up to this point, as far as helping departments and units go through curriculum change. I've been in the role for a bit, but as far as my level of experience with that and learning, I'm definitely more of a beginner and a support support person in that way. And then the graduate students, so teaching, do a couple of those classes a year too. So helping students learn about teaching, what's good teaching, teaching competency. How can I do my best to support students to learn what I want them to learn, what we need them to learn.
And so is that teaching that you're doing, is that, you said you teach courses in the College of Education as well?
That's separate.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see. And with, I guess on the Gwinnett side then, are you being sought out typically to help teach these instructors and grad students how to teach, or is it courses that they're required to take with you, or?
Never required. Okay. But there's been some what we call short courses and workshops put together to support folks for sure. There's courses that the College of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies has that we offer those courses through our unit. Another really important piece in Gwinnett is the experiential learning, and so I'm doing some support and resource development around experiential learning. What is that? What does it actually mean? It's not, it's goes beyond a lab work or an internship. How can that happen in the classroom? How can we make students learning it as authentic as possible? Whether that's audience assessment, the activity itself, and it's also vitally important to the work of internationalization. I support it's not a program per se, but it's an option for instructors called Collaborative Online International Learning, COIL. And professors, USAS professor will find or help them find a partner overseas, whether it's Global South or wherever that might be, that has, and it might be a research partner that they have, or somebody that teaches a class similar to them, and they get their classes together and they work together on a short project. So students get to know each other. It's really cool. And it actually had a bigger uptake globally because of the pandemic, because people got used to and more knowledgeable about working together virtually. And so it's a newer program at, not worldwide, it's been around for a while, but newer program at USask. So yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, the professors that have done it are just, they can't say enough good things about it, but it's a lot of work for them too.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
Just a lot of work in what ways, I guess?
Doing the planning. So they have a course. So say, for example, one of the projects last year was an instructor in College of Education who was working with second year, third year students, elementary, those intending to be elementary school teachers, and they have to know about science education. And he worked with somebody in California, which doesn't sound that international, but actually it's at a university where there's lots of first generation university attenders, and so quite a diverse, if you want to use that term, a real lovely mix of students, and that was a similar type of course. And so within their course they had students work together in groups. So a couple, would be say a group of 4, 2 USask students, 2 from the university in California, and they work together on a short project. Most of their pieces were done virtually. Kind of depends how the time zones work out, how things in class times and that kind of thing. But I've certainly seen it happen that students are able to get together initially in like whole classes virtually, and then they break off into groups and work with each other. It's usually over the course of about 6 weeks, something like that, and then present their projects, and that might be on a virtual bulletin board. But they've had a chance to get to know somebody else from another place, and maybe they're a kid that's never left Saskatchewan except for they've gone to a resort in Mexico, right? Yeah, exactly. So then they're like, oh, I think I'd like to go to Colombia. I want to go check this out. Just broadening their view and just seeing, life beyond the front door of Saskatchewan, I guess.
It's probably a really good networking opportunity as well for a lot of them.
It could, yeah, it absolutely could be. And there's barriers, there's time barriers, there's language barriers. There's usually a student assistant hired to help navigate the tech and some of the marking and just the intricacies of the actual meetings, because inevitably there'll be technical things that'll be a question mark here and there.
Yeah.
So great experience for them as well. It's usually a graduate student. So yeah, I love the concept. I've just I've found so many people interested in it, but people that are at capacity, they've been through COVID and they have so many other things that they have to do. And so somehow asking people to plan one more thing, right? Because it's additional planning to happen within their course. They have to make sure, am I good pedagogically? Am I a good match for this person?
Yeah.
Do I even believe the same things about teaching and what we want our students to do together? And so it's, it takes some energy, but it can be, and time, very important. And we can't seem to, multiply anything. What is that in Harry Potter? Hermione, she's got that little...
Oh, yes, yeah.
That little spinner that allows her to be many places at once. Some days I think that would be a great thing to have.
It would be an amazing tool. Yeah, I wish I could have that too sometimes. You spoke about capacity. Is there a lot of stress that way still with instructors and courses? It was my understanding that was it this year that the university, when most of the classes were back in person, the on-site attendance record was broken or something. It was like the most students on campus ever recently or something along those lines.
I think students were, I think it's a bit of a generic statement. Students were anxious to be back in person. Not every student, right? Some students found that, hey, this flexibility is pretty great.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm okay if I'm taking online classes, and maybe I'm going to seek that out. And that's fine, right? It certainly taught us that, right? To be more flexible. There isn't just, that's one or two delivery methods. As far as capacity, though, really referring there to something that I didn't see as fully, I wasn't as aware of before I got to know instructors, is that it is a very... I think universities anywhere, now that I read about it more and just and have professors who are friends, there is such a massive demand on people. Like, I really don't know. I'm busy because I'd like to be.
Yeah.
And they're devoted people as well. But there's only so much you can ask of people. There's only so many graduate students that you can supervise. There's only so many grant applications, and that's another thing. Grant applications that you have time to think about, to fill out, and of course you're not successful and in many of them, but that demand is there, that one must bring research monies in. Classes, especially first year classes, which should have, in my opinion, the very best teachers, are large. And so that adds to the load. And people have their research, grant applications aside, they have their research obligations depending on their division of work, but most, have the teaching, research, and community.
Yeah.
How do they do all of those things and have a life, and stay healthy? Yeah, I'm not sure. So perhaps I was naive, or I just wasn't involved at the same level of people at campus or on any campus. But I hear that from everyone, that they're just, people are stretched to the limit. It's tough to say no, especially for earlier career faculty, right? Because you kind of have to be Wonder Woman. I have a lot of respect for academics. Most people are, I would say, at their capacity. And it's tough. I think it's tough for them to say no. That's what I understand, right?
Yeah, I'm not envious of having to organize courses and design curriculums and make sure that your students are getting graded appropriately and making sure everybody has a fair chance at getting assignments to you even. It all seems like quite a bit.
Yeah. And for some people, I mean, they don't go into it, they don't go into the work because they love teaching. That's something that they need to do, but perhaps they're have more research intensive. So it depends what gives them joy as well.
Yeah.
Right? And so if they have a heavier teaching load, perhaps that is, like those things that you were talking about, that's what I love. The creative aspect and going through and seeing how people have done and what they've learned and talking to them about that brings me joy. However, filling out grant applications does not. So, and I don't think it does for anyone. But doing the research, I mean, people are passionate about that. But it's just the amount that is expected of people to me, it seems to be very much a workhorse environment. And that's not healthy. So people are fortunate if they have great managers. And of course, we don't train people in management because they're academics. You end up being a department head and hopefully you have that personal capacity that makes you makes you a good manager. Good to your people.
We're talking about lots of different skills, and that is one that is I think much more difficult to hone than people appreciate. You always hear people talking about I don't like my boss, or he did this, or my schedule's all screwed up, and this and that and the other thing, and management sucks. And you see it in movies all the time, like I don't want to go talk to corporate and all this, but organizing a team is very difficult, and it takes a lot of work because you've got their problems, your problems. You got to make sure everybody's working well together. You've got deadlines that you're worrying about, and then you also want positive results, right? Like who wouldn't want something to go well? So they've got all this stress, and I try really, really hard to appreciate in my own work the roles of everybody else that's supporting me that I don't see, because I just know I'm not doing their jobs, and I wouldn't want to. So I think I don't know. I think people forget that sometimes, that it's very difficult.
One of the things that really I tried my best to drive home to any interns that I had along the way, and if you're listening to this, is the importance of having respect for every person in the school, respect for every person's work in that school, because you don't do that work, but their work is integral to you, and you're not better than anyone else because they are emptying your trash can and sweeping your floor. You're not more important as a human being than them, and you don't know how they ended up there, how much joy they might get from their job. Maybe it's the very best thing, and we work together as a team. It's a heavy load, I don't know if when people go into management they understand that human element of it, like how responsible they end up being sometimes for how people see the team, how everybody has their own responsibility, but for some, like we hear these complaints about management. I have no complaints about mine. I've had amazing managers over the years and do now. But how, really sometimes one wrong phrase or, can really damage a relationship in that power dynamic, depending on how people view you, and having to look out for people, especially over COVID. Oh my goodness. Like always just being on, like any kind of, any manager role there. Wow. You had a lot to bear, so I really respect that. And most of my life I've had my own business. whether on my own or with my husband, and had staff to hire and manage, and certainly had that role briefly when I was working at SAS Polytech. And so it's I have great respect for good managers.
Right. What has your experience been like being in those positions with your own businesses and at Polytech, like you mentioned?
I think a lot of many of the skills that you learn by experience, or you're taught to learn by experience, that are important in counseling apply to management. And then of course beyond that as well, like being a good project manager, being on top of things, because missed details can impact people's lives tremendously, whether that's your own staff, or that's your clients or your patients, or whatever that might look like. I found being very careful in knowing who I wanted on my team, and in making those hires made all the difference. Yeah, and so there's certainly skills to be learned about interviewing. I will say that. And that is definitely, that's definitely something I think I'm a person that can improve in over time, because people can perform in interviews, right? In job interviews, and it's nerve-wracking. It's horrible experience for most. But do you see that true person and how it is? Like, are they going to be a good fit with your team? Is really, is really important. But for the most part, I've enjoyed that role. I've certainly taken very much a back seat to that in my current work, just by choice. And it's not because I'm tired of it or anything like that. That's just been, I'll step up when I'm needed, but that's not something that's necessarily been required, I guess, in my current role.
Yeah. It's almost like an art form, it seems, a little bit, because, like, you are organizing human capital. You are like, I don't know, I guess it's this might not be the greatest analogy, but I guess like a car, if somebody's designing a car, that if you're putting in a lot of force production here, where are you not putting it in, or what parts can you stress? And so who can you give more work, who needs a little bit of a break, and how are they working together? And like you said, interviewing and making sure, like, okay, that was a great interview, but is that who that person is? Are they going to be able to perform the ways they say they do?
Yeah, and be a fit. Yeah, I like the car analogy. I like the dance analogy as well, right? You'd be able to, will you be able to dance together?
Yeah.
Group dance, maybe round dance.
Yeah, that's a good one. Because that's a great one too, because like you talked about, saying something, especially if you are in the management position, or have an authority over anybody. You mentioned saying the wrong thing can be very detrimental. So it's quite like a dance that way. If you step on somebody's toes, it makes it a lot harder to dance with them.
Good one. I like that. Yeah, if you're not listening to the music, if you miss the beat, if you're tone deaf, all these kinds of things. Lots of analogies that we can draw there. Yeah. Nathan, one thing that I haven't talked about, and it's ironic really, because it's so incredibly important to me as an instructor, is really is my responsibility as a treaty person. Yeah. So in the work that I do with College of Education students, whether those are undergraduates, and I do some work with education and society, I see it more as teaching students about how to navigate and know about professional ethics, the law, governance structures, and graduate students, and so aspiring administrators or school-based administrators, sometimes people from across campus, depending on what class I'm teaching.
Okay. And
I've had the opportunity this year as well to work with the new Indigenous educational leadership cohort. We've had a couple go through educational administration, but these folks just started in January. So my responsibility as a treaty person means that is my responsibility to make that, regardless of the course content, to make that a vital part of teaching, because that is so important to our teachers, to our communities, to our families, to our country, reconciling or knowing our history, reconciling our history, having an awareness of all of the strength and beauty that Indigenous people of Turtle Island have and bring, have always had, and bring, and the kids that are in our classrooms, with the graduate students that I taught, especially over COVID. We had international students that couldn't get to Canada, so they're working from, Nigeria, and, in any case, regardless of if they're there or here, it's important for them to know as well, what is the truth. Not information that they might get in the cab ride from the airport to the hotel when they first arrive in Canada. And so that is a vital part of who I am. My kids are Métis. They have Métis ancestry back to Red River settlement, and I have a new grandbaby whose mom is also Métis, and my kids are also have that, like, I'm Scottish, Scottish lineage, so they have that as well. That was also very important history and cultural elements. But those, that is so important. So if I said to you, Nathan, we're all treaty people. So what does that mean to you to be a treaty person?
It's a difficult question, because I've been asked that since I was in elementary school, because just learning about our history, and I won't lie to you, it's always been a weird one for me, and particularly because I have to think about it. It's that question is tough for me to answer a lot of the times and discuss, because it often feels like, when it's discussed, what being a treaty person is that it feels like it's followed often by trying to bestow responsibilities on people that they don't feel are theirs. And so it's interesting, because I guess lots of people talk about what does it mean to be a treaty person, and I often hear that it's reconciliation and going above and beyond to make things better. But it's interesting for me, because it often feels to me like if I'm not contributing negatively to any relationships between myself and other people or Indigenous communities or anybody else, why am I expected to be going above and beyond in some areas,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, it's a good question. And because I would say certainly people of my generation, people that went to school in the, in the 70s, 80s, like we were never taught any of this. And so what does it mean? Well, it means that we have the benefit of treaty, right? So therefore, it goes beyond simply recognizing that and knowing our history and understanding why things are the way that they are, and talking to people about it, and forming relationships with people that are anyone that might come across your path to work together. And as we work together, well, the Métis people, perfect example of that. Indigenous women, kept people alive, kept the men alive. Their first winters when they were, and beyond, when they came to Canada. And so it is, it is different for everyone, but just starting out with that responsibility of, yeah, it is important that I know, that I know the history, and that when I, see people and meet people and greet people, that I see them as, human beings. And there's so much to learn, not just, the parts of our history that are blackened because of horrible intentions of not only trying to assimilate Indigenous people, but really just trying to kill them, trying to eradicate them through systems, through starvation, through residential school, and beyond. But there's so much to learn from people and about cultures that can just enrich our lives as well. And then sharing who we are, but it always starts with knowing who we are, like where that's where that starts. So yeah, so that's really important. Yeah, that's just a very important part of the work that I do with students in the College of Education, because they're working with kids, and things are going to get better. I believe that they're going to get better. I mean, obviously Indigenous people are survivors. They have incredible strength and resilience. They've managed through all of, a few hundred years of history, not just here, but various parts of the world.
Yeah.
Right? And so teaching children about the history, and in an attempt to have a more equitable future. Yeah.
What does that look like to start?
Depends who you talk to. Some people, and I'm sure you've heard, you're very well, you listen, So there's the warriors, and we need those warrior voices to say land back, right? And they're, over time, I mean, people have been fighting for having the land and resources they were promised, that they were never given. A friend of mine who was a chief for a number of years in Cowessess First Nation, he's been working for over 30 years with band members to straighten out the land claims, right?
Right.
And a lot of it is, economic development. So if we look at the places that there is economic development, people are able to thrive. It's the reality of it, because you have a decent place to live. You have clean water to drink. You have a job. You have, you have strength in community. And so people spend a lot of time and money fighting the system, fighting the auspices and the rules within the Indian Act for just to, claim or get what they were promised in the first place, which was sharing land. It was never like, oh, here you go, we'll go over here. That was not the intention, ever, by those who negotiated. And we know that now. We didn't for a long time, but.
And what does that look like, getting the land back the way it's? Is it giving it back? Is it, or sharing, or like how?
I think. Well, and I'm saying that's one. Land back is one example of the voices that say, things will shift significantly. Do I personally think that that's realistic? I think, just based on numbers, I don't think that that's going to happen. But I think that over time, in the teachings say, 7 grandfather teachings, and teachings that say after 7 generations, people will, I don't want to misquote, but there will be emergence. Like things will start improving. I think it's going to be more than 7 generations after so many people have been devastated intergenerationally. So I think it's partly time. I know it's education. So when we're teaching 6-year-olds now about the kinds of things that I know I didn't learn in school, these people become voices. These people become, hopefully, people with influence in the future. Notice I didn't say politicians, but yeah. And people come to know each other, and people intermarry, and like the society, the society evolves. Depends on one's belief, right? Some people say, oh, well, there's always got to be a strata, and there's always going to be, someone at the bottom, right? Whereas I have a different belief system.
What are you seeing that's being done so far that you think is good in these areas?
Chief Justice Murray Sinclair said, and Senator now Murray Sinclair, is education is what got us into this mess. And that's largely true. I mean, there was a lot of work before, residential schools, a lot of actions before that. But that was the thing, that residential school system, that was the most devastating, because it was a brainwashing. It was it was people being inculcated with your language, your beliefs, anything about you is not worthy, right down to your familial relationships, your hair, the way you see the world. And so the education system, I do think is key. And that's why I said it's going to take a great deal of time, because the old attitudes are still there, unless people have been taught otherwise. So my mother is a perfect example. Like she's 86. She will tell her friends the way it is. When they say something racist, they say something incorrect, she'll school them.
Okay.
Whereas our little ones are being taught in a different way. So I think that is, I think that is going to be our key. I mean, there's fingers of it everywhere. There's so many people that realize what has happened is wrong. We can't change that, but we can be different in relationship going forward. Yeah.
And outside of the obvious things about being different in our relationships, like not being violent, not assimilating, not segregating, not being racist,
all those easy things.
Yeah, all the big ones. Is there anything in changing our relationships to be different that you think should be done actively, generally?
I don't know. I don't necessarily know in a relationship, but I think we can do a better job societally, letting people know that they're important. Like when you have thousands and thousands of people that live in, some say, fourth world conditions on reserves, don't have good drinking water, have all sorts of health issues, whether it's skin, tumors, because of being essentially poisoned by their water system. How do people, and not having access to services, to health services, just as an example. And I understand that there's the remote element, but I mean, we're a wealthy country. We can do a much better job. But out of sight, out of mind, right? And when people live in poverty as far as economically, that's not necessarily to say that people are poor. I'm thinking of what an elder said. I heard an elder say about poverty one time. I'm not poor. I know who I am. Those of you who don't know who you are, Elder and Dr. Willie Ermine said that. But it's tough to when you don't have the basic life necessities. There have been improvements, though. That's not to say that there hasn't been improvements, but that should never be happening in our country. Never. There's lack of awareness too. I saw not that long ago a fellow, I'm sure it's a very good cause, who raises money to bring healthy fresh, clean, healthy water, good water supply to various places of the world. Nothing done in Canada. I'm like, I don't think I will contribute to that cause. You're going to start doing some work in Canada? I think I could contribute to that. I'm kind of my own backyard kind of girl first.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
How do you, like, what's your opinion about the education about Canada's history then? I guess my understanding is that most of the provinces still do not teach it. I don't know if that's true now, but I think when I was in elementary school, I didn't know this at the time, but I think Saskatchewan was the only province where it was mandatory to teach about Indigenous history. I don't know if it's true, but I'd heard that.
Again, I think that things are improving. I don't have my finger on the pulse of curriculum across Canada. I know with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations, I know that many of those calls to action are about education, and school divisions, not just in Saskatchewan but across Canada, have taken those on. But it's one thing to say this is in curriculum, but do teachers feel confident enough? Are they educated enough themselves to teach it? And what I have heard from teachers over time is, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't know enough about it. I feel like as a white person that I shouldn't be teaching that. Teaching the history, I feel like I'm not an expert in it. And I think that we have to ask for grace. I think we have to to know enough to feel, to speak as knowledgeably as we can about the history and about what it means to be a treated person. Because we don't have nearly enough Indigenous teachers in our schools represented. There's lots of Indigenous teachers being educated, but not necessarily being hired for all sorts of reasons. Some go back to their own communities. It's tough to get into a city school, that kind of thing. Lots of the responsibility, I think, falls to the colleges of education, that we have to make sure that our teachers are prepared to go out and do that teaching, like have that knowledge, regardless of if you are teaching a high school math course. But especially in the elementary teachers, and I think that's improving. And again, that's a piece over time. But no, it's part of Saskatchewan curriculum across the board. And it's woven into areas across the curriculum.
Right.
So, but teachers have to do it.
And beyond just teaching about our history, do you think anything more should be done in terms of the classroom?
Like what?
I don't know, actually. I guess because I guess I could use my own education for an example. I was just taught about the history and what happened, and the things that were done, but it was just learning about it. I guess. Is there anything that you think beyond that should be?
As much as, and this is a hard thing, because I think we really overtax, we ask too much of elders and knowledge keepers, but as much as possible to have teachings done, at least, have students meet. Knowledge keepers, many knowledge keepers that I know, they have areas of, just like anyone with a PhD, areas of specialization, whether it's in medicines or whether it's in, and oftentimes medicines are attached to, connected with ceremonies or whatever might, to meet these people. Like, this isn't just history, it's now. I guess that's an important piece too. And it's not just knowledge and knowledge keepers and elders. It's the history is now, so making that as real for students as possible. as authentic as possible, right? Rather than just, this is what I've read in a book.
I guess okay. And what do you feel like your roles are, and as a treaty person, as you've said, and being in education?
Yeah, for sure. Certainly, first and foremost for me is ensuring that anybody that goes through any of the classes that I teach, they understand that responsibility, through us talking about it, not by me preaching about it. They have to discover that themselves. They have to take that journey themselves of, who am I? How do I fit in this? What are my responsibilities? What are the joys, that the positives, like not just always looking at, okay, residential school, which was horrific, right? How did South Africa learn its system? How did the US learn it? Yeah, how did South Africa learn its apartheid system? Watch it, learning from Canada's residential schools. How did the US have their day schools, learning from our system, right? So a devastating system, that's one part, that's one piece, but learning the pieces around too, and then encouraging people to learn more. So as an educator, that's a huge part of my responsibility. As a friend, as a community member, as a family member, as a colleague, forming relationships with Indigenous people. I'm part of a Métis family. I have a Métis grandson. Helping my kids and who are adults now, and my grandson, and hopefully more to come, to know know their place in history and be proud of that. Like, the pride is a really important part, and for folks that, so many people that just had that stripped away from them, that recovery time is, is huge. How can I contribute? How can I, for voices that are silenced? Like, I'm not a savior, right? People have their own responsibilities, but what are those niches? How can I contribute as a community member as well? I did work for 6 years, volunteer work with an organization in the city here called Dress for Success, largely when it started out. And the mission of Dress for Success is to help women who are out of the workforce to get to an interview, have clothes to wear, because it's tough when you're coming from poverty to have, you can't go to an interview if you have sweatshirt and sweatpants, right?
You just even have the access to those things, right?
Exactly. And building the confidence. And then once a woman has gotten the job, then providing a week's worth of clothing for them, and then inviting people to be part of that organization and to give back to other women and build that community of women, because it makes our community stronger, it makes our families stronger, all of those kinds of things. So anywhere where we can do those kinds of things that are real tangibles in the community, because we can't be everywhere for everyone, right? So how can we do that? So I would say probably 80% of the beautiful ladies I worked with were 75 to 80% were Indigenous women. Yeah, that were.
And that's in that specific one, Dress to Success.
In Dress for Success,
okay.
Saskatoon. Yeah.
And so it's not exclusive to just Indigenous women.
Absolutely, for everyone. So it might be someone newer to Canada, somebody who's been off because of an injury or disability, somebody that's been a stay-at-home mom and is a single mom, right? Who wouldn't be able to just go out and have access, go out and buy even an outfit to go. And so that's part of it. And then you build that community, right? And those, learn more about budgeting and income tax and whatever you want to learn about, networking, different professional skills that people might be interested in, and really just becoming part of that community. So it's growing hugely. I haven't volunteered for a few years with it. I just volunteered so much at one point, my husband said, "Is that your job or is this your job?" But it was so, so important to me. And I actually started because when I was working at Sask Polytech, when I was counseling there, so many of the people that I was working with were going for job interviews and were women, and said, I can't go. Like, I don't have anything, I don't have anything to wear. And I was just like, how can I help this person? Help them to help themselves. Like, give that hand up, right? Yeah. So it's not a handout, it's a hand up. And then I heard about this organization and then started referring people to it and started working with it myself. So I guess anything that we can see, how can we contribute our skills to helping, helping families and helping individuals, because that's, again, I'm a grassroots person, so just helping in that way makes it real. I mean, you can write letters to politicians all day long, and I mean, that's still important. It's still something that we should do. But how do we see real change? And sometimes that incremental change is because of things that we do in community.
And so is that what reconciliation looks like to you? I would say my dissertation that I've just completed, just want to defend this summer, is actually about allyship. What does allyship mean? Who can claim it? Who names it? And looking at it historically. And then the research that I did with it, though, was in looking at how in higher education, what does reconciliation mean? Like, what does that allyship mean? Well, it means getting to know people, working with people. And for me specifically, I looked at Indigenous, non-Indigenous, right? So I have Indigenous friends, Indigenous colleagues, who are also friends, and doing work with them, just getting to know people and working together and doing work that, as teachers, make this space better, and learning from my colleagues. That's a huge part as well. So for me it's all about relationships. And I mean, people, they have their different views on it. Mm-hmm. As far as, being an ally means you are an anti-racist, or you are, which is important, or you're an activist. And that's, those are important pieces as well. But for me, it's about, being open to relationships and making relationships, and not just on the surface, like, we're research, we're research friends. Like, no, come to my house, have a meal. Mm-hmm. What can I do? How can I support? How can how can we work together? How can you support me? How can we be friends? I've heard that term anti-racist before. I've never looked into it, though. What does that mean?
Anti-racism, activism and theory is, and I wouldn't say that I'm not an anti-racist scholar, so I wouldn't necessarily be able to speak all that eloquently about it. But speaking out against racism, naming the elements of our system, and like pointing out that it is embedded in almost everything that we do, in our policies, our system structures, in our practices. And it's so embedded that oftentimes we don't see it. Mm. It's about realizing our unconscious biases, and most like anti-racist educators that I know are, they're very, like, that is who they are, and it's their impetus and their motivation, and they're very, I don't want to stereotype, but generally very vocal. Like, you need to speak, you need to speak up about it and call racism what it is, right? And question it. Like, why is it that?
Okay.
Yeah, that policy is the way it is. So, for example, when I started as a PhD student, one little bit of project I did for one class is I found out why are some people allowed to have their spiritual practice on campus and others aren't. So one was a smudging policy, for example. there had to be negotiation and policy, and so much work gone through to be able for people at the beginning of a meeting to smudge. So if that's burning sage or sweetgrass, as a elder might say a prayer, or just to enter into the meeting in a good way. And there were so many layers of policy, and it's partly about health, right? Because some people have allergies and that kind of thing. It's partly that, but that's not it entirely, right? Whereas you have a chapel here, you have prayer rooms here, you have all of these other ways that other religions or spiritualities are recognized, the indigenous ones weren't. And people had to, there's a lot of red tape to go through. So just that system in itself privileges, right? Privileges Christianity, or privileges, whatever spirituality there might be. But it's in all our systems, right? Christmas holidays, Easter holidays. Because that's how our system started out. So it's not saying that that's a bad thing. It's just people shouldn't have to fight for, to have their holy days recognized, right? Well, they have to take a vacation day. So certain voices are privileged in our society, and we'll get better with it over time. I'm confident. Yeah.
So indigenous cultural practices were prohibited at the university, or just not recognized?
The practice of smudging, if you wanted to do it, couldn't be done inside because it creates smoke.
Okay.
It's usually quite a lovely smell, but some people are allergic to it. So I understand that part of it, but it was just, people had to. There was lots of negotiation, and I think people are exhausted of negotiation. They've had to, they tell me, I don't know, I don't have their experience, but they've had to negotiate their whole life for just to be, to have the basics recognized, I guess.
Yeah. I don't want to misquote you, so I'm going to ask this again. But it sounded like you were saying that you believe that the system is still wholly systemically racist. Or not wholly, but you believe that much of the system is systemically racist.
I think so. And I think that we have our beliefs about whether ill-informed or not, about, like, if you go and ask, if you've surveyed 10 people who are like, I don't want to generalize. I just think that there's still lots of racist attitudes out there towards not just indigenous people, to people who are different than the person who is, that's embedded in us because we fear what we don't know, which is just such a shame, right? Because then you don't get to know beautiful people.
Right.
And I think, systemically that there's definitely elements of racism, or like ways that are dominant European that miss the mark, for sure.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Is that from your experience, or from just as it's been told to you from people that are experiencing it, or like is that firsthand? Or
I think that's a combination.
Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely a combination. Things my kids tell me, they, when they work in the oil patch, and the kinds of things that they hear people say about indigenous people, but not just indigenous people, right? Like really narrow, ignorant attitudes of people that just don't know and have never bothered to figure out, or never have bothered to find out, or just judgment calls, right, based on their experience or based on their upbringing.
Yeah, if you've never looked at lots of people never sit down and really examine their beliefs, I don't know, I just is it okay if I play devil's advocate with you a little bit?
Absolutely.
I'm obviously, I'm not indigenous.
Nor am I.
And so I'll speak on my experience about it a little bit, but I've been called the N-word outright by people before, and I've had negative things about me, or negative things said about me. And growing up, I heard lots about oppression and it being harder for black people or people that have a darker complexion or this or that. And my mom would point it out sometimes, and if she notices those things, she's aware to them. And but I can't think of a time once in my life where it's been my experience, even being called a racial slur. You know, I don't. It's, and I know this is not the same for everybody because not everybody has the same experiences, but for me, it has always felt like it's been my perspective about it, and not the actual reality of the world. But I'm just me, you know, and so.
Yeah.
Because.
Well, yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say that even like being called the N-word, it seemed like when somebody had said that to me, it felt more like what we were talking about earlier about that person was just a very hurt person and they didn't know really. It was actually an Indigenous person that said it to me too, and they I felt more like they were hurting than they wanted to hurt me. You know, it didn't feel like they were being racist, and so but just to, I guess to summarize, it's just never been my experience in those types of ways.
Yeah. Well, and any of us can be racist, right? Depending on like just how we might see the hierarchy of things. I'm so happy to hear that you've mostly never felt it like that. That makes me feel a bit sad for the times that has happened to you. Do you think it's partly about economics and education? Like where, you know, kind of where any of us have been fortunate enough to land?
Yeah, I'm not going to discount that at all. I think no, and in the case of being honest, I've grown up in a situation where I've never been without. And so, but I think, because I think that's an important thing to consider in my perspective, but I think the things that have offered me greater control over not seeing the world as being inherently racist towards me was a mindset that I was granted by having good teachers in my life about, and not just teachers in education, but teachers in parents and other adults and friends and family. And in particularly the idea that I'm not different because I'm light skinned or because I have a mixed, because I'm mixed or I have parents from two different races or anything like this. You know, for me, it was always just that I am me and I'm capable and it's about what I can offer to the world. And, you know, so it's never, I don't know, it's weird because people have asked me this actually before. I've never really looked at the world and thought like I was black or I was light skinned. It's just, so I don't know. It's interesting because I hear these stories a lot from other people and it's hard for me to see it a lot of the times. And I try hard to, but yeah, I don't know. It's just never been my outlook in the world. So it confuses me, I guess.
Yeah. And I can't imagine because I can't be in your shoes. And I think, I don't know, like, yeah, the strata of what people view here too. You know, here, for example, in Saskatchewan, I don't know if you've grown up here, but, you know, at any time through history, you know, it hasn't always been that there's been prejudice or racism because someone is or prejudice because someone's of a different race. You know, it was like, oh, those Ukrainians, those Poles, those Scots, those, you know, kind of that crab, you know, not crabs in a bucket, but just, you know, I'm better than others. Like completely backward way of thinking.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So yeah, maybe in another place and time your experiences would have been differently, but thank Creator it hasn't been, right?
Do you think that your mindset can alter your experiences?
Can alter your experiences? I mean, your mindset, your perspective and your memory, that's everything. We can definitely change our mindset. and we can learn. But how are we going to learn about that person isn't just a lazy so and such, whomever, unless we never get to know people?
Right.
Right? Yeah.
And you think that's lacking today, just trying to get to know people? And
I think so. Yeah. Or just even talking to people. Like, if I'm downtown and a kid comes skateboarding past me and, I'm not scared of that person. I'm not, like, I'll greet that person. I don't think that's, or if it's an Indigenous kid or, like, whomever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that fear that we carry with us, it blocks us. It blocks our, like you said, mindset. It blocks us. We miss out so much by having that mindset.
Yeah, I agree, 100%.
Yeah, and it definitely can. Yeah, it can change, absolutely.
Do you think it's a good thing to be in the world and see it as being bent against you? If I guess, for example, if the system has systemic racism in it,
Mm-hmm.
Is it good as an Indigenous person to go into that aware of it? Not that you should be ignorant of it, but this idea that it should be something that you're aware of and looking at and focusing on. Because then it would seem to me almost like you're validating this idea that forces beyond your control are bent in opposition of you.
I see what you're saying. And as a non-Indigenous person, I can't speak to what an Indigenous person might think. I guess it depends if if you're figuring out how to navigate that system. Like, if it's the reality of it, as opposed to this is all negative and it's never going to get any better for me. That's definitely, for any of us, that's definitely going to, to work against us. But I think if my experience was seeing that over and over and over again, goes back to role models, right?
Yeah.
Like, if there's that one person, that mentor, that teacher, that coach, whomever that might be, that lunchroom mom, like, that believes in you and that you're saying, okay, that's the way things are, but it's going to be different, it's going to be different for me. I think that helps.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. And regardless of how the world is and the situations that you find yourself in, it makes me really, really sad when I see people who see the world as that way, even when it is being that way to them. I know somebody who sees the world in it appears to me at least, like they see the world in a very black and white way in terms of skin color. They see white people and black people. And I was thinking about it because they're an adult, and it made me so sad because I was thinking about living in a world where I'd gone multiple decades and believed that the majority of people being white were better than me, and that I was oppressed and the system was bent against me, and that was just the way the world was. Because if that's the way the world is, then what are you going to do about it? You're going to fight the world? Yeah. It's really unfortunate because if there's something you can do about it, then you can integrate some self-efficacy into your life. Mm-hmm. And you can look at things that you can do and change your mindsets and your outlooks and hopefully live a life that provides you a purpose and a meaning and a being. But there's so many people that live in the world like this person that I'm talking about, who just believe that there is nothing that they can exert over themselves that would change the world as it appears to them.
Or change their environments, change their surroundings.
Exactly.
Yeah. and I can understand that, and I can't judge that, but I would find that very, very sad as well. And the thing is, we are different colors. We have different races, but the problem has been when it was taught to us that, this race has this quality, this race has this quality, and then there was there's this hierarchy. Like, that's so much of what we believe has, that is systemic. That is. Not that we're taught that directly anymore, but when people were told, like, papal decree in 1400s, Indigenous people are not human, right? Like, there's just a judgment, that judgment there, and unfortunately lots of times based on Christianity. But we have the opportunity to look at that differently, and we know things are, we know things are getting better, but it does make me sad as well. I can't speak to other people's experience, and perhaps I would be that way too, but I am extremely privileged, right? White, Scottish background, farming family, pioneers who, have the privilege of coming here, homesteading, farming, on lands that were previously, not owned by anyone necessarily, but were definitely the footsteps of the ancestors are on those lands, on those farmlands where I grew up. I didn't know that when I was growing up.
Has all this always been important to you? I'm just recognizing.
I started to figure it out when I met a friend, and just met a friend of the family. My first husband was a respected elder, and she is a respected elder now, Dene elder, and wasn't even really that respected at the time, I would say, by my in-laws, but very wise woman. And she said, "Roberta, you're in education. There's some things you need to know, my girl." And she told me about her residential school experience and how her sister died in her arms. And I was just like, what are you talking about? Like, I had no idea. I believed her, and I really liked her. Like her. She's still alive today. This was, oh my God, 30 years ago. And that was the first whiff that I started to make connections between the kids in my school growing up that were Indigenous. And I had very good parents, like very good teachings from my parents, as far as we're all human beings, you respect people for who they are, like, just that was ingrained in us. And a really broad group of friends my parents had through politics, really. They weren't kind of backwards farmers, I guess I would say, or what we might see as a stereotype of that. And then things started to click for me. So I'm in the College of Education, and I'm thinking about, as I recall now and know from like journals from years ago, my friends who were 60 Scoops kids, like, they were taken from their families for whatever reasons, and you grow up with them, and then some of them would disappear. And, those were the only Indigenous people I knew. And then when I started teaching at Nutana, and I started learning about ceremony, and I started learning the teachings from the elders, and Joe Gallagher, who was a teacher, Native Studies teacher, it was called at the time, at the school, and hearing his stories and learning from him, and getting connected with the community, with Whitecap, just Dakota Sioux, and teaching with some Indigenous teachers, and going, oh, I had no idea. And then just really, like, learning, learning myself more about what people brought to the table, what strength, and, the stories and teachings, and then just continuing to educate myself more about it. So really started, for somebody my age, I think early for me, long before TRC in 2015, those years.
What's TRC?
Truth and Reconciliation Commission
yes,
and their work, which was actually was another royal commission. There was a royal commission years before that actually made massive recommendations that were never taken up, but kind of all it wasn't witness statements being taken about residential schools, but there were so many things, like there have been so many things throughout history that government has asked for and then ignored. Right. And when I say government, I mean us too. I don't just say, oh well, the politicians do that. Like, we elect those folks.
I guess what are some I don't follow it probably as much as I should, but what are some positive things that are coming out of the Truth and Reconciliation Act? Is anything being done yet? Is anything are there any good changes being made, or is it just kind of still smoke and mirrors and just speaking about things?
Right, is it just performative? Have a look at, and of course this is an example of very successful economically, viable, but through lots of hard work, community hard work and leadership. Have a look at the agreement that was just signed between Whitecap Dakota Sioux and with Chief Darcy Bear and Indigenous Services of Canada, Indigenous Minister. Yeah, they've just signed a new treaty that they are. It's a nation-to-nation agreement, and that's really what people are looking for, to be recognized in the way that they say that they should be as sovereign nations, because that was always the intention based on the treaty. And so we're seeing movement there. We're seeing movement for the most part, though, because of that economic base, because people have a golf course, and that's not just Whitecap Dakota Sioux, or they have lands in BC that have vineyards, so they have wine production. Like, a lot of it is tied to economics. But that's part of it too, of people, that money being, in the community so that things are better for everyone, as far as the schools that can be built, the teachers that are hired, the opportunities that the kids have, what they see, can be. Yeah. So I would point to that as one example of a change that isn't just, something on paper. It shifts the funding agreements. It shifts the who says what has to be done in what way.
Yeah. I guess, is there anything that you'd like to point people in the direction of doing and being a part of on this topic?
I think when I'm thinking of the teachings of elders and knowledge keepers, I would say learn about yourself first and be proud of who you are. Be proud of who you are and have a grounding in that, and really know your history, the goods, the bads, the uglies, but really, know yourself, because we're, we are we are many generations deep of different folks coming together. That's the beauty of the world. But get to know yourself first and take responsibility. Like you say, okay, well, how can I learn more about it? Well, Saskatoon Public Library, Regina Public Library has a list of reconciliation readings. Support local, or not even reconciliation readings, amazing books from, people of all cultures and backgrounds, but non-fiction, fiction by Indigenous writers. Support local Indigenous businesses, make a point of that. Because that's another way. Celebrate. Realize that murdered and missing Indigenous women, it's a real thing. It is, and it continues to happen. And that's because of a lack of respect for other people as human beings, and not seeing them as women worthy of respect because of either situations they're in or because of race, or because of when the opposite should be, of course. Yes.
Well, it's very nice to hear that you're passionate about these areas and doing good work in them, and and it's been very eye-opening for me and learned a lot of new perspectives, and so. And this is a great conversation. I honestly want to keep going. I want to keep talking about it, but I think this is I've got somewhere to be tonight, so I'll have to cut it off here. Is there anywhere that you want to point people towards so that they can work with you, like a website, or not necessarily work with you, but find your work or get in touch with you if they're looking to do anything?
Sure. They could just, if people want to have a conversation, have a chat, go for tea, probably my work email would make the most sense. That's r.campbell, like Campbell soup, CAMPBELL @usask.ca.
Okay. And then you can find the rest of your information, I guess, on the USask website as well. Okay, great. Is there anything that you wanted to cover that we didn't cover? Or?
No, you have great questions. And you made me think, so I really appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to have this kind of a chat. Important questions and important chat on a Sunday afternoon.
Yes, it was very important to me, and like I said, I learned a lot, and I wish we could keep talking, but I'll let you go. So thank you so much for being here, Roberta.
Thanks, Nathan.